Welcome to our noon workshop today on informational interviews. Today, we're lucky to host Mike Tolman from Entrada. He's a USU alumni. He got his dual master's degree, an MBA and MMIS here at Utah State, and we're so lucky to have him here. I often heard from students when they'd go on career exploration trips, they'd come back and say, Mike Tolman's so awesome. He's a great person to connect with. Make sure you send other MIS students his way. And it's true. You'll learn from Mike today. He's great at building connections, genuine connections. And so we're lucky to hear from him today. We'll turn the time over to him to share his presentation. And as always, please feel free to submit questions through the YouTube. It looks like you're still muted.
There we go.
There we go.
That's like the quote of 2021, isn't it? Or 2020, you're still on mute.
It's so true.
So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. It's a pleasure to talk to fellow Aggies anytime. Just a little bit about myself. I actually majored in English literature in my undergrad. I don't like to mention the university, especially when I talk to Utah State students, but it was a university south of Logan, and then I didn't realize that when I was getting that English literature degree, how useful it would be as I went on in my career into sales and retail and management roles, and then finally into an MBA and an MIS. And when I got my first job after grad school, my boss brought me into the office and said, I want to give you a raise and a promotion. I said, great. What's that? And what's the promotion? They said, I want to make you a product manager. And I said, awesome. What's a product manager? And it wasn't until I got that first role out of my graduate school that I realized that product management is that perfect blend of the marketing and the positioning and the strategy and the finance that I got from my MBA, the information technology and systems that I learned in MIS, and then the ability to communicate and to decipher and develop arguments and rhetoric around what I was trying to achieve and how I was trying to communicate that. That I realized that all these things, from my sales experience, my marketing experience, my English literature experience, finally with my MIS and MBA, that combined to this role in product management. And I always felt like if there was anything I could do to help people make that realization sooner so they didn't have to go through this windy path, that I would always try to open myself up for that and to give back. So it's really a pleasure to be here, and to especially talk a little bit about my role at Entrada and talk about how I kind of got here, and especially as we talk about informational interviews, because I think those are a big component of networking and opening up opportunities for yourself. Here's a little blast from the past of my Huntsman experience. This was actually, this was in 2014. So 7 years ago, almost to the week of my time in Beijing with the Huntsman School. So the purpose of informational interviews, I think it's completely open-ended, and it really depends on the situation that you're kind of finding yourself in. As I was thinking about it, there are really three things. The major one is networking. There isn't a role that they're hiring for, but you do want to leave a positive impression. You might be asking for a referral. You might be asking them to be a mentor. Or there's just some shared values that you both can get from interacting with one another as part of this informational interview. The other part is recruiting. Like there is a role that you're looking for, and you'd like a warm referral into the company. And so some of the things you'd want to make sure that you do is that you give that person a compelling reason to hire you. And so what they're going to be looking at is really effective communication as you try to set up that interview, and then ultimately when you get to the point where you're trying to close and get them to give you that referral. And then finally, the other part is just understanding, to really know what a role is, what it involves, what an industry is doing, what kind of problems they're facing, because you'll notice that as you go through any hiring process, people will be asking you questions to gauge your understanding of what you're trying to get yourself into. they never want to start with a clean slate with a student. They'd like to have some of your fields at least filled in, or at least a template that they can help mold and craft. And so some of the pluses of an informational interview is it's usually pretty low stress, but then there's also high stakes, because you only get one chance at a first impression. Be yourself, but then sometimes you can also overshare. So make sure that you're careful, that you're very strategic about which parts of your life that you open up to. The other part is networking, but networking never gives a real clear timeline. And so if you're like an international student who has to find a way in to get somebody to sponsor you and all of that, those kinds of stakes are really, really hard for informational interviews. People are usually willing to help out, but it's, when I was like at Ancestry, when I'm at Entrada, I don't always have an open role directly on my team. And so even though I'm willing to help and provide information, it's really hard because I know that there's nothing I can really do to help you with your immediate goals. And so sometimes that's why a lot of people will either ignore a message, or maybe will give you kind of a short or a short, sweet kind of reply, is because there's nothing that I have really immediately that I can do to help you. And so sometimes in navigating that, just being clear that you're networking, or you're trying to prepare for interviews, or that you're looking and trying to understand something that's happening in the industry, that usually makes it a little easier for me to engage now when I don't have something that I can do to help you. And then after that, just be yourself. When you're being yourself, though, in an informational interview, it feels a little contrived to like jump into your resume. So just find ways that you can talk about yourself that are relevant to what you're trying to accomplish in the informational interview. Finally, how to land a meeting. The number one thing that I could say is just hustle. That's I got approached a lot at Ancestry. Entrada probably doesn't have the same kind of logo or brand recognition as Ancestry does, but I was always impressed with the people that were diligent in following up, the people that were really clear about what they were asking me to do and how I could help. And the ones that just were persistent, that were really, really kind, and then followed up and kept me accountable, because there's a lot of things flying around you as you're trying to navigate some of these fast moving companies and spaces. And so having somebody on the ball and actively managing their own communication really helps get that through. So like I said, people are busy. And one of the things that it's obvious to anybody in a hiring position, they know what you're getting out of this, but if you can make an argument for what they get out of a conversation with you, sometimes that can help a little bit. Helping out their ego is probably the biggest thing, just because gratitude and compliments will go a long way, especially if you're commenting on a recent post that they had, or a recent tweet that they posted. If they're posting industry insights, commenting on that and showing that you're actually kind of not creepily, but you're following the things that they're doing. I think that goes a long way in giving some value back and giving them some validation to why they would want to engage with you, right? The next part is an action. You want to be in control of the conversation. Do your homework on the industry, do your homework on the company, and then show that you're totally invested in making something happen. And then finally, some of the hows and whats to prepare. So I did this you in 30 seconds or less, journalism 101, and then map the company vision and values to your vision and values. So if you notice, when I did my 30-second intro at the beginning of this, I really focused on what I was passionate about, my career in product management. And then I walked you through my history of English literature, sales and retail management, my experience at graduate school at Utah State, and then finally my first job and my introduction into product management. And then I hope in that 30-second intro that I did of myself, you could see a little bit of passion that I have for the discipline of product management and my commitment to making this worthwhile for people to at least understand a little bit more about what that role is and what it can be. So as you go through that, me in 30 seconds, be really clear about who the audience is, what your intent is, and then try to craft it in a narrative. So have that kind of narrative arc, you know, the introduction and the backstory and some kind of a climax that leads to a resolution. And if you can do that and be concise, the first question that anybody ever asks you in any interview is, tell me about yourself. And if you don't have that nailed in one sentence, in 30 seconds, or in 30 minutes, it's gonna be a really awkward introduction to that first question that they ask you. I remember there was one question, one time I interviewed for a position, and they asked me, tell me about yourself. And I talked about my family for 15 minutes. And then I found out that it was 80% travel. And so I lost out on that position in the first 15 minutes because they're like, here's a guy who's a family man and he's signing up for a role that's 85% travel. And I didn't get the role. I wasn't even considered. I didn't even make it past that round. So always be cognizant of, I hadn't done my homework of what the role was. And then in my introduction of who I was, I completely missed what it was about the role that my personal experience led to being a good contribution. So again, like if I were to walk through my career, there's a whole lot of twists and turns, companies and logos, a lot of experience. Where, you know, I've directed 50 to 200 individual contributors. I've launched 3 new products to the market. I've had 50 plus major product releases. I've been in product management for over 7 years. But you have to, everybody knows that this is generally the way that our life story goes, right? But when you're talking to someone in an informational interview and when they ask you, tell me about yourself, you want to really give them that clear, here's my point A, here's my point B, and I think you can help me get to this point C. So even though everybody knows that this is your story, find ways of trimming it down and getting it to that concise A, B, and C kind of narrative frame. And then again, this is the kind of the journalism 101 part, but always try to think about big ideas. And when you're in this informational interview, think about it like you're a journalist and you're going in and you're trying to figure out all the ins and outs of the role, of the position, of the company, of what that person's work history has been. And then if you can, try to find the shared mission and values that you have compared to the company that you're evaluating or the industry that you're going into, because it's that foundation of shared vision and values that ultimately leads to someone saying, this guy is a really great, or this person, I should say, is a really great cultural fit for our company, for the industry, for this career step that they're wanting to take in their life. So anything you can do to kind of hone your vision and hone your story and craft your questions to kind of highlight that shared vision and values will ultimately lead to next steps. And then always be able to go deep at a moment's notice. So to do that, you really, as you're going through the interview, know about the economy, be able to talk really well about trends that you see, because like I work in multifamily industry, in the multifamily housing industry. If I don't know what lobby groups like the NAA or the NHMC are doing, if I don't know what the stimulus packages are doing for renters and also for their checks in order to stave off evictions, that has a direct impact on the software that I'm building for my customers that are in the middle of that always. And so that's where, like, knowing about the economy, knowing about the industry, knowing about the company, knowing about the department, and even knowing about the individual that you're targeting, right, for this informational interview, and being able to go high and go deep in any one of those areas will help you a lot. It's probably more for when you're actually in the interview process that you want to have all of that. The informational interview can help you get all of that data around these different areas. But you should be able to talk in your interview about all of these different factors that are driving that your company's goals and vision and strategy. Here's a couple things that I think they're going to provide this a little bit later. But if the company is hiring, be able to answer these questions. Do some research. I was on an interview a while ago with a company in Germany. They wanted to send me to Berlin, and I hadn't done any research in terms of cost of living adjustment from what my salary is here in Salt Lake compared to what it would need to be for me to live in Berlin. And so that was a really awkward part of the conversation because I couldn't talk about what my salary expectations were because I had no idea what I would need to support my family in Berlin. So whenever you're going into an interview, make sure you're clear about what you're wanting to find out there. For informational interviews, this is where you could get some of these answers, right? Or you could feel out from a hiring manager at that company what kind of answers they might expect to these types of questions.
And I'll interrupt right there, Mike, because we get
absolutely.
a lot of questions about as far as filling out an application or when a hiring manager does ask, what is your salary expectation? Is that something that's appropriate to ask in an informational interview and saying, what would be an expectation salary for someone coming into X role?
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect question to ask. Nobody's ever really comfortable with dollar amounts, like specific dollar amounts, but it's always easy to talk in ranges. And one of your big outs is to talk about total compensation, just because there's always your base salary and then there's total compensation, which includes all of the different perks and all of the different like PTO policies and those kinds of things. And so, but generally when people are talking about salary, they're almost always talking about base. And so that's where you can get some wiggle room in a range. I think there are resources available like on Glassdoor and Indeed where you can see some of those ranges. The Department of Workforce Services has ranges and pay scales for certain roles. In software, it's a little hard because it varies so wildly from company to company. But Glassdoor is usually a pretty good source to kind of determine what those ranges are. And then after that, just know you should always know what you're bringing to the market. You should always know the skills that you bring and what value you could turn around. I've had people that were able to push out a product that all of a sudden got us $3 million in revenue, right? And so when you do something like that, you can say, well, talking about $120,000 for my salary isn't all that. It's a drop in the bucket to the 3 million that I just earned you this year. So being able to kind of keep those market forces in mind, and really it's just a matter of managing risk too. And so you're managing risk because you want to make sure that you get your bills paid. They're managing risk because from an employment standpoint, you don't know if this person is going to bounce in 2 months, and then you have to rehire, retrain, and do all of that kind of stuff. And so that's where you're always trying to manage that risk when you're doing the salary negotiation. But doing your homework and making sure you know a range and informational interviews are great to kind of dip your toe in the water before you really get to the point where it's usually around this on-site interview panel stage. That's usually where it really starts to come in. So I hope that helps answer that question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, and hiring processes, like, it all sucks. And I know that, like, for everybody that's going through it right now, if you're graduating or if you're close to graduating, you're putting in so many applications, and some of them are really smart and they pull your information in from LinkedIn, or they are able to extract it from your resume, and others you just have to enter it in line by line. And then that's even assuming that you get past that first initial HR wall, and so in a lot of ways, informational interviews lets you skip that whole like screening step and get you right into maybe even seeing a hiring manager. Warm referrals get you 90% of the way there. And if you've made it to an interview with the hiring manager, they've pretty much already decided that you could be in the company. So you should celebrate that, be super, super excited, and then just make sure as you go through the process that you're giving them a compelling reason to hire you. So anyways, so don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask for that warm referral, because it's going to get your foot in the door. Just make sure you align your vision, add value, and then make sure that you're always grateful for any help that they're able to offer. So anyways, I have some summary slides, but and some things, but that's all that I had prepared. So
No, that's perfect, because we've had several questions come through. So
sure.
one question is, with those warm referrals, how do you actually find the correct people or person to reach out to? You mentioned that at Ancestry, you'd have a lot of people reach out, but you not necessarily for your team, or you weren't hiring. How do you kind of logistically find the right person to talk to?
So a lot of times, so you already know, if you're looking at a job posting, you know the job title, and you know the department that it's in, right? And so you can go to LinkedIn and you can go to the company's LinkedIn page, and there's a tab for people, and you just click on that people tab and do a search by that keyword or that department. And anybody generally with a director or VP in their title is going to be a hiring manager. And even like senior product managers are good. And so then you can try to gauge like at what level you want to try to get into. Directors and VPs are super, super busy. And so then you'd want to look at like your second degree connections or maybe first degree connections in LinkedIn to try to hack your way in, and maybe even try to get somebody that you're connected to on a second degree, and then to get them to give you a warm introduction to that person. So there's a little bit of hacking that way, by looking at people in the title and all that kind of stuff. I think anybody that's working, or you could even go another way and just look for somebody with the title that's in the job at the company that you're targeting. And then you can just send out a LinkedIn request and ask them these types of questions. Tell me about what it's like to be this person, or you can always play that college card, that college student, undergrad card, or even grad student card. Can get you through a lot of doors. Beyond that, I would say the Alumni Network is strong. I think anybody that's suffered through 4 Logan winters is going to try to help other people that have done the same thing. So yeah, leverage that Alumni Network. Look for those kind of common connections across there. And then after that, don't be afraid to, everybody's connected. I mean, the new CEO at Entrada was on the board of 3 of the companies that I worked in previously. And so I had never met him directly, but he was on the board of companies that I had prepared board presentations for. And so he had heard my name and knew me from all those other previous experiences. So when you're in something like software, everybody's connected and there's a great network. And so I would say, don't be afraid to leverage any of those, and to never be afraid to ask for a favor.
That's great feedback. Thanks. As a career coach, I have this conversation a lot with students because it feels more productive to just get on LinkedIn or Indeed or Handshake and apply to a bunch of jobs. And at the end of the day, you can say, I feel so accomplished. I applied to 50 jobs, but that's not really as effective. And it's much more strategic to go this route. Like you mentioned, informational interviews, it's that career exploration piece, but also that networking piece that's really essential. So we had another question come in, Mike, about the format of these informational interviews. Have you found it to be most successful in person, taking someone out to lunch, perhaps Zoom, a phone call? What do you typically recommend?
Well, yeah, so I would say there's a lot of different ways. One is in that initial connection request. They always say to go, like, getting somebody just from nowhere. I usually, when I ever see like an Aggie submitting a connection request, I usually just always accept it, whether they've written something to me or not. But if you can start out that request with a question that's really thought-provoking and meaningful and maybe specific and targeted, I know that when people send me connection requests, they want me to try to help them find a job, right? But but I don't really want to work for you. I'm happy to help, and I'm happy to lend my experience and answer questions, but I don't want to be employed. But I don't want to be, I don't get paid to be a career coach. So anything you can do in that initial request to just be really sincere and to really ask a sincere, thought-provoking question will have me accept that right off the bat, and I'll probably respond right away. Um, Beyond that, though, it's really just a matter of feeling out that relationship and seeing. I remember I saw a guy who was a product manager at Google in Salt Lake City, and he had commented on something, and from some shared connections, and so I reached out to him, and my question to him was, how the heck can you be a product manager at Google located in Salt Lake City? Because from what I understood, you had to be in Mountain View, or you had to be in Austin or Seattle or New York, and that was it, you know? And so he actually said, well, let me take you out to lunch and I'll tell you all about it. And so through all of that, I got to meet with him and got to hear his story and what he had gone through and how he had spent some time in San Francisco, and then an opportunity came for him to be able to work remotely in Salt Lake, and here he is, you know? And so it's so I think is in terms of format, it's really an organic thing, and it's really open-ended. I will say this though, back to the earlier the last question, every single job that I've gotten after grad school has been because of somebody that I knew informally. The first job out of grad school was with a company from a guy who was on the board of the advisory board for the MIS program. The job right after that was a guy I went to high school with who saw what I was doing at that other company. The job after that was somebody that was on the board of the guy from high school, and in the same kind of venture capitalist group. The job after that was because I did every single social engineering experiment I could to eke my way into Ancestry. And then the job after that was meeting with a friend of mine over lunch, talking about my problems at Ancestry managing backend data systems, and his problems at Entrada managing backend data systems, and then us finding out that we could work really well together. And so every job that I've had has been because of these informal informational interviews.
That's great. Thank you. I think that gives us a lot of hope for our students too. A lot of them that are graduating this semester and still looking. And it's true. I think networking, it kind of has this hype of being awkward, stiff, kind of cold, but successful networking is really about those genuine, authentic, informal relationships. So we have time for one more question. The question is, there's only so much you can learn from a company's website or LinkedIn about their culture. What kind of questions might be successful in asking in an informational interview that will really get at what is the culture really like, at that company?
One thing that I always like to ask is to say, if you could change one thing about Entrada, or if you could change one thing about Facebook or Google, what would it be? And generally their response to that is a good indicator of how often their ideas get squashed by upper management, or how often their values come in conflict with some of their day-to-day activities. I would say, first of all, knowing what the company's values are, what the vinyl lettering is on the wall. At Entrada, our 5 values really drive almost every discussion that we have, from roadmap planning to planning an activity for like a drive. This summer we did a drive-in movie night so that everybody could park their cars in our parking lot and have a big movie screen, and we watched I think it was Despicable Me. And so everybody had their dedicated spot. Every car was 6 feet away from each other, but all of those values drive everything that we do. And that was one where, one of Entrada's values is party, business up front and party in the back. And every single conference room at Entrada is named after a famous mullet from the 80s or 90s. So just across the hall here is Hogan, after Hulk Hogan. upstairs, a lot of our executive meetings take place in a conference room called Norris. And so like that business up front, party in the back drives our conference room names. It drives our company parties, and it also drives our communications with one another. And so being able to ask them for stories about how their company embodies those values is something that people are always usually really happy to share and talk about.
That's fantastic. And I like the question of what is something that you want to that you would change, or something you might do differently, because it is sometimes hard to get at what are the more negative aspects of the job, because people will typically cover the positives, especially in informational interviews. So I think this is great feedback. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. We're about out of time there, but we appreciate your time. Just a reminder for students, we have a list of ideas to ask in informational interviews on the Huntsman website under career resources, or it's something that Google is always your best friend. So if you feel extra nervous and not sure ideas of specific questions, you can check out the Huntsman website or Google as well. But thank you, Mike.